Today we're going to discuss how you should go about planning your content when it comes down to content marketing. So basically what we're going to go over today is some of the tools that we have already mentioned in your content marketing strategy, but I think we're going to spend a little bit more time detailing how you should actually go about it, what are the key concepts that are behind the tools that we're going to be using, and how can you round it up so that you can deliver on that strategy that we have already outlined in the previous chapter. So at the end of the day, the questions that we're going to try to answer are simple, right? What kind of content are we going to try to create, right? So what are we trying to communicate basically? Who are audiences? So who are we going to be targeting with this message, content, videos, etc., right? When are we going to make this available? As we're going to see, when the content is actually distributed, and especially how frequently we actually put out content, it's going to be a very important aspect. Okay. Next, what channel or media are we going to use for the distribution of this content? Channel matters a big deal. So we're going to have to make some decisions and determine what kind of variables we should be using to basically ascertain which one is the best channel for us to distribute this content. And then finally, how are we going to go about creating the content? Right? How does a team look like? What kind of assets do we need to have in place? What kind of talent is necessary? And also we'll discuss a few tips about how to write and how to come up with ideas. Okay, good. Now, to do all this, the essential aspect that should be underlying all your decisions is what we have already discussed, which is you need to have a solid content marketing strategy, right? And if you start with the wrong strategy for content, you're probably going to end up with the wrong content overall, right? Now, if you remember from our last presentation, content marketing strategy is basically focused on four main pillars. The first one is, what is the essence of your brand? What is the story that your brand is trying to tell customers? What is your brand about? Okay, that should be the guiding principle for everything else that we're going to be doing underneath. And remembering that for somebody to understand and remember what your brand stands for, you're going to have to be consistent. And this consistency in telling the story about your brand and what your brand is about, it's what should dictate everything else that we do after all. Right. Number two of the main pillars, who are you trying to reach? Who are your target segments, right? What are the customers slash audience that you're trying to basically tell a story to? Okay, and this is going to dictate to a large degree what story you tell, although the what should be mostly guided by your brand ethos. But when you pick your ethos, maybe you should also consider what customers think about. Okay, and two, it's also going to dictate what kind of media and format you're going to use when you're telling the story, because different target segments are going to be interested in different ways of consuming that media. Okay. And third pillar is, what kind of customer experience do you expect, right? And this ties neatly as some sort of intersection between the first two pillars, right? So the brand essence is talking about what the brand stands for, and the way we capture that oftentimes in business is with a value proposition, right? So your value proposition is going to be basically telling your customer what it is that they are going to get if they actually use your brand, right? On the other hand, the experience is going to be a combination of that, and also what the customer wants and who the customer actually is. Okay. Now, lastly, you're going to have to make sure that whatever it is that you do, you have very clear objectives in mind, so that you can basically decide, after maybe collecting some data, whether whatever efforts creating content you actually did in the past, did they actually work or not? If you don't have a clear set of objectives, and last chapter we discussed this idea of a SMART objective, one that is concrete, that it's measurable, and that is actionable, right, and especially time bound. And if you have objectives like that, this is gonna enable you basically to see whether any efforts that you dedicate to content marketing, they actually do indeed translate into results that are in line with what it is that you're trying to achieve. Now, to do this, what we're going to do is, like we already hinted at last chapter, we're going to be basically checking first what it is that we stand, right? Before you can create new content, it's absolutely essential that you take stock of where you are currently. And the way we do that is via a content audit, right? Now, to do a content audit, what you're going to do, or what I'm going to strongly recommend, is that you come up with some sort of template. Typically, this is done in a spreadsheet format, but if you hate spreadsheets, you can definitely do this in a more traditional fashion using a simple notepad and just taking notes by hand, right? Or maybe using a Word document. But spreadsheets are particularly well suited for this because we're going to have multiple columns, each of which is going to represent a different variable, right? And what we're going to do here is essentially take a look at exactly all the digital assets that are content related that we have right now, currently. That's going to mean things like websites, right? Any social media profiles that we have created for the different brands in our brand portfolio. If we have other digital assets like newsletter, maybe an email newsletter, right? Any of the content that we have created for the consumption or for the public in general, we should just basically consider all those digital assets as part of our content audit, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to essentially carefully list what content is it, what kind of format does that content take, like is it text, is it pictures, is it a video, is it a game, right? Whatever format it actually takes. Okay. Then what is the media that we're using to disseminate or communicate that, right? Is it going through a website, or is it one of our social media channels? Is it a blog, etc., etc., right? Then we need to come up with some way of assessing the quality of the content. Now, there are a couple of approaches that we can actually use here. One is you can essentially try to content analyze yourself, whether the quality is up to par or not. I am not a big fan of that way of doing things, although you can always try it. If you do so, I strongly suggest that you take 2 or 3 people to rate the content instead of only one person and using the average. By the way, that method of doing things usually assesses in a more sophisticated way using something called inter-rater reliability. But at the end of the day, by using the average, you get close enough to that, and we don't have to go to psychometrics. Good. That's one way. The other way of assessing the quality of the content is by using some more objective metrics. I like that a lot if you can decide what kind of metric will actually tell you something about the quality of the content. I'll suggest a few in a couple of templates that I'm going to show you in the next slides. But these are essentially metrics that hopefully will be aligned with the objectives that you're trying to achieve. Okay, good. Other than the quality of the content, you should also try to decide what is the underlying purpose of that digital asset, right? Are you trying to just entertain people, maybe so they can become aware about who you are and what you're up to? Or is it something that is trying to provide information to the customer so that they can understand how maybe a product category can help them, and because of that, maybe in the long term, they could become potential customers? It will be a more informational or educational content. And then finally, you might have some digital assets that are explicitly created so that you can actually convince customers to maybe buy some of your products or services, right? Good. And a couple of final aspects that you might consider also included into your checklist for your audit. One is the content that you have online current? And by current, I mean have things change, and maybe, for example, let's say that you're providing recommendations about how to solve a problem. Is there a new technology available in the marketplace that is actually not mentioned in your recommendations that maybe should be included so that everybody can consider everything that could actually help them as a customer solve the problem that they have? Okay. And along the same lines, do you need to make changes to the content, or can you actually keep reusing the content as is? Sometimes you might run into legal reasons why you actually need to change the content. Maybe some of the content you might have some copyright issues associated with the content that you have, and because of that, maybe you need to remove some of the aspects that are mentioned in there. That will be a good reason to just update the content by itself, or sometimes, like I said before, because reality has changed and the content or recommendations are actually not current anymore. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you in the next slide a content audit template. But before we do that, what is the point of basically keeping stock of all these digital assets? Well, the important thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to map what you have right now to the goals that you're trying to achieve, right? And you're going to try to see whether you have sufficient assets dedicated to the goals that you're trying to achieve. And if the answer is no, you are going to try to identify those gaps or holes in our digital portfolio so that we can actually make sure that we have sufficient content that is going to hopefully enable us, or at least get us on the way on achieving those goals. So let me show you a couple of possibilities. So here you have a couple of templates that I'm going to show you so that you can see what it is that we're talking about. So what you will be doing in a spreadsheet like this is you will be basically listing here every single piece of digital content that you have across all the different platforms that you're using. Okay, and those will be listed as some sort of name, or and if there is a URL associated with it, you might just want to go with the URL, obviously. Okay, then you will have some information that will give you an idea about the time frame when it was posted. Okay, and you might also have another column here that it's not shown in this template, where it will tell you when that content was actually created. Sometimes there is a big gap between those two metrics, and might actually be useful to know when it was created versus when it was posted. Okay. Then what you're going to have is some sort of title that in a quick glance is going to tell you a little bit about what kind of content is in that digital asset. Okay, oftentimes the URL is not going to do a good job telling you what it is, whereas the title will give you at least a big picture summary of what's in there, obviously, right? What else are you going to have? What kind of digital asset is it? So in this case, here we have some blogs. We also have some landing pages, right? So this could take all sort of different form. Okay. Then you might have some more technical background on it, right? Like for example, in here you have word counts, right? Maybe another type of technical information that you might want to add in here is how quickly can the search engine actually load that page, if it is a page, for example, right? Most importantly, given that we've been talking quite a bit about SEO, you might want to have also here what kind of keywords are directly associated with that digital asset, right? So here you have a few keywords for each of the assets. Sometimes you have so many keywords that you might actually require to separate this across different tiers. So you might have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, because some of the pages that you have might be constructed out of a really large list. Otherwise, this gets a little bit messy. Okay. What else? You might also have some information about usage patterns, like how many people actually visit or land on the different pages. Okay. And then finally, you might have some metrics associated with the quality of the page. Now, you might be tempted to think that the number of people that land in the page is a good indication of quality, but in my experience, you should use other metrics, like for example, bounce rate. Now, what is a bounce rate? Bounce rate is going to tell you what percentage or how many people land in the page, and within a small amount of time, maybe 2, 3, 4 seconds, they actually leave the page. That means that whatever, or the page or the digital asset, it doesn't have to be a page. You can do the same thing with videos, obviously, right? But what this is trying to measure is how of interest is the digital asset that you have created to the person that has landed there. So if you have a bounce rate that is really high, like you can see in this case, over 80% of the people that landed in this particular digital asset actually lived right away. And this tells me that there is some issue there. It could be that what we're promising that these people are going to be able to get is not what they are getting, or it could be that the quality of what they are getting is poor. Okay, but there is a mismatch somewhere. So this is going to be able to help you maybe identify some of those potential problems that you have in there. Let's take a look at a different template. There are many, obviously, and you should customize the template to what you're trying to do at the end of the day. These are just ideas and examples so that you can see how it will work. Okay. So here you have another template, right? And as you're going to see, there are some similarities and then there are some differences. Okay. So here, for example, what can you see? You see also the URL like we had before, right? And here there is a column that I find interesting, and this might help you map digital assets to goals, which is one of the important aspects of this audit that you're trying to do, which is in what stage of the customer journey do you expect to have some action or improvement based on what content is in the page. So in this case, if you remember the customer journey, you start with awareness, consideration, then you select a brand, then you actually make the purchase, and then after you make the purchase, maybe you have some sort of loyalty stage, and then finally maybe some sort of advocacy where you actually go out of your way to let other people know about the brand / product. Now in this case, what we're saying here is this page has some information that should help, according to our hopes, with the awareness stage of the funnel. By the way, funnel or customer journey, I'm using those two terms more or less interchangeably, although I'm aware that there are slight differences. Good. Now, what else does it describe? It describes what kind of content it is. That's similar to what we had before. So this will be a blog post, right? Then, interestingly enough, we have some sort of persona here that it's identified a priori as why that content was created. This is more in line to the strategy that we were talking about first, content strategy, right? And in this case, we have a made-up persona right here because this is a demo. But obviously, you will use one of the personas that you have created, which is hopefully based on real data / experience, right? So not only we are including here aspects that are going to help us map to objectives, but also we're going to know which one of the personas should be geared towards. And this could help us, for example, align our content with the kind of channels that we're going to use later. Because based on the demographics associated with the persona, you should probably do some matching to those demographics with the channel that you're using. Here you have the number of hits or views that we have for that particular blog post. Here we have another performance metric. This is a different one. Instead of looking at a bounce rate, this is another classic metric. It's called call to action percentage. This is when you are asking the customer to do something. What this means is that 5.6% of the people that landed here, so out of these 1,349, approximately 5.6% of them, which is what? That will be roughly about 60 people, right? Roughly, or 60 some people, right? Did whatever we were hoping that they did, right? So this idea of call to action is generic, but what kind of actions could we request from a customer? Well, for example, we might have a newsletter that is available, and to actually get the newsletter, they might have to sign in with their personal information, let's say their email, for example, right? Because we're going to send it via email, right? So that call to action percentage means that 5.6% of those people actually sign up for that newsletter once that they landed on the page. In this case, that page is a blog post, right? Good. Or the action could be very different. It could be putting one of the products that are available on that site into the cart, or it could be watching a video, or there are different there are different actions that you can basically define as the important aspect. And of course, those actions are going to be different across different digital assets, because you're not going to be able to do everything everywhere. In fact, there may be some assets where no obvious action is possible. It's just consuming the content. Okay, good. And then you have here another performance metric, which is the amount of times that this particular blog was shared in some sort of social platform, social media, right? So I will argue that these two metrics are going to be indication of, at least to some degree, how good of a job we did with the quality on this content. I would say if you're just talking about the content of the post, social shares is probably closer determinant of quality, and the reason why is because if you share it, it's because you think that whatever is in this asset, it's worthwhile. The step from sharing, which has a really low cost of engaging in that action, by the way, sharing socially could be one of the CTAs that you have, obviously, but it's not in this case, as you can see, because the numbers don't match, right? On the other hand, the CTA that we have here might actually be more demanding, right? When you need to input your email address, that is crossing a threshold of cost that is beyond just sharing something on social media, right? It's more costly, and because of that, you're going to find a lower percentage. So I would say probably if you're just looking at overall quality of the content as opposed to of the offer or action that you're requesting, which will be different, I think social shares will be a better metric. Now, both of these metrics, bounce rates and shares, are commonplace used to determine whether the quality of the content is appropriate or not. If most people are not sharing the content and most people are bouncing out of your site or your digital asset, that means that the content essentially is not up to par. Obviously, you can add more to this. One thing that is clearly absent in both of these templates that I would like to have there is what is the media or platform that I'm using to provide this content. That will be important to know. So if it's a post in Facebook, I would like to know that that post is actually on Facebook as opposed to maybe in Twitter or some other platform, because that's going to tell me also whether there is a good match. So maybe the content quality is good, but maybe the reason why people are not doing something is because we're not reaching the right audience. So to distinguish those two, it might be worthwhile to add that column. And there are others. What you should do is you should have here the columns that make sense given what it is that you're trying to achieve. Okay. Now, once that you have your audit completed, what you should do is you should be able to identify the gaps between what it is that you're trying to achieve. Remember, we already set the goals first, right? And what it is that you have in terms of content. So you might find that for certain goals, the content that you have is not going to get you there, right? And once that you identify that, it's time for you to start planning about the new content that you're going to create to fill those gaps, right? And to do that, a tool that is absolutely essential is this idea of an editorial calendar, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to plan what content is going to be created, but this calendar is also going to help you with your workflow. And the way you will do that is by assigning responsibility. So within your team, assuming you have a team of more than one person, which is commonly the case in mid to large size firms, right? You might have multiple people that are in charge of digital / social media marketing. And in a situation like that, you'll have to assign the task of creating the content to specific, maybe writers. You might have actors if you're doing video / voice, right? Etc. etc. So it will depend on the kind of digital asset that you're creating, but basically within the team who's going to be assigned the responsibility of going through the different parts that we are discussing, right? And then you will discuss the topic, right? So that we know what it is that you're doing. Provide some more granularity or details concerning the content that you're creating, right? What keywords are you trying to develop within that piece of content? Again, don't forget that at the end of the day, if search engines and platform curation engines do not pick up your post or do not show your content to the potentially relevant audience, and nobody's going to read it. So it's not just creating good content, but it's creating good content that is going to be bumped up to the top of the feed for the people that we're interested in, right? So these keywords are particularly important, like we have said, and you should build the content around it, right? Then also mapping to what we were discussing before, what is the target audience or the target persona, right? And when I say target audience and target persona, I'm also talking about your target market. All these three are to a degree interchangeable. Okay, good. And then finally, what kind of metric are we going to use to define our KPI, whether this is working or not, right? So in this case, what we're using is call to action or call to action percentage, like we were before. This is not the only metric that you can use. We're going to talk a little bit more about KPIs in the next part of this presentation. Good. Now, a few tips. By the way, whenever you are conducting these audits and you're starting to plan for the future, you might get if this is the first time you're doing this, you might get a little overwhelmed thinking about how to create content. But you shouldn't worry too much about this. You need to realize that once that you set a plan in motion, and if you do a good job with all these steps, a lot of ideas are going to start showing up because you're going to identify what these gaps are. And once that you do, the ideas are going to follow, of course, assuming that you've thought about the brand and you have a clear idea about the brand story that you're trying to tell and who is your audience, right? So if you have all these ingredients, the ideas and the content opportunities, let's say, are going to start becoming clear soon. But just in case they don't, right? I would say in general, a good way of generating new ideas is by trying to play a little role game. Pretend that you are somebody who doesn't know your brand and, for example, is interested in one of the products or services that we are offering, right? Or is facing a problem that is similar to what somebody will basically take care of with the products or services that we're offering. In a situation like that, right, you can already start thinking about what kind of digital assets or content will actually help them make that decision, right? Good. Just in case that doesn't work, right? And when it comes down to idea generation, 2 people are always better than 1. Right? And the obvious answer why is because the best idea that you can come up with is going to be the best idea of the one person plus the best idea of the second person, right? And one of those 2 is going to be better. So when you have 2 people, right, the chances that you will find good ideas, it increases really rapidly. When I say 2, you get the point, 3, 4. So do some internal brainstorming within the team. Okay. Of course, when you're doing this, make sure that you keep in mind the 4 pillars that we have discussed and the gaps that you have identified via your audit, right? Good. Now, what if you feel like you don't have enough ideas based on this? Okay, how do you come up with ideas? Now, the best piece of advice that I can give you, if I'm honest, is you should let your customers tell you what they want. If you believe in the marketing idea, the marketing concept, I think crowdsourcing of ideas is an obvious answer to this problem, right? So let's say that you have a YouTube channel, right? A very good way, and let's say that you have already, I don't know, let's make it small, 10,000 followers, right? For YouTube, that's a small channel, let's be honest, right? If you already have 10,000 people watching your videos, you can ask these 10,000 people to tell you what it is that they are interested in. Like, tell them to leave you a comment, right? And they will. And not only that, if you're smart, you should also suggest that the viewers of the videos upvote the ideas that are interesting to them, right? The cost of clicking the like, it's really low, right? So this is going to give you free market research conducted within your actual customers, or at least actual channel viewers, I should say. I'm assuming there is some overlap there, right? About what kind of ideas are they interested in? What kind of content are they missing? What kind of new things you can create for them that will actually move their needle? Okay. What if all this fails? What if you don't have a channel? What if you are new, you're starting from scratch, and you're one person working in their garage with a great idea, but you don't know how to do it, right? And you don't have a big team to brainstorm. You don't have customers that you can ask. Okay, well, why don't you ask a robot, right? Why don't you ask artificial intelligence to help you on this? Okay, let me show you something that I did yesterday, just for the heck of it, and it took me about 2 minutes. Like, you can use AI to generate ideas, right? So let's say, for example, for argument's sake, that I'm trying to create a new business in the Richmond area, right? And to do that, I've decided in my infinite wisdom, which I'm not sure is that infinite, by the way, to create a used car dealership in Virginia, right? If I'm trying to do this and I don't know where to start, I want to create maybe a Facebook page for this new dealership, and maybe I want to create a website that has some stories about not only who I am, but why the customer should come my way, and maybe providing some more value beyond just information about my dealership, right? Maybe some information about, I don't know what to do, right? So this is what I did. I used the following prompt in ChatGPT. So as you can see, I didn't give a lot of thought to this, but I'm going to try to see you how there's still value on this, right? So I asked ChatGPT to find keywords for a used car dealership in Richmond, Virginia, and I typed in SEO here just to emphasize that I was interested in keywords associated with content marketing. Now, this is just a little way of making sure that the artificial intelligence actually understood what I wanted. You don't necessarily need to do that, okay? But it seems like it works. So this is the answer I got, okay? Now, if you go through this, some of them are obvious. They're just slight variations on what I inputted. But there are some themes in here that are going to tell you what people think is interesting, or maybe better said, important when it comes down to a dealership. Okay, in this case, used car dealership, by the way. Okay, so what I've done, and this took me another 5 minutes, is I just read the answers and I tried to highlight here themes that seem to be pertinent or relevant in this space. Okay, you can go through the rest and maybe you find other things that I didn't see, so this is not exhaustive, but I find things like affordability, quality, certification, which is a signal, if you ask an economist about quality, reliability or reliable, cheap, cheap and affordable, obviously the same story, right? Trusted, okay? So by looking at this, I can already start coming up with themes and topics that will be of interest, right? Trust seems to be a problem. So when trust is a problem, maybe what you need to do is you need to create a guide about how to buy a used car to make sure that you don't get ripped off by a car dealership. That will be something that you don't need to tell me to come to your dealership directly, because that's not the point, right? But you can walk people through the different stages that they should actually follow in order for them to trust the purchase, right? And that's just a very quick way of generating ideas, assuming that I know nothing about car dealerships other than that it's a used car dealership and it's in Richmond, Virginia, right? So use all the information available at your disposal so that you can actually generate themes and topics that are actually important for your customer.